what is going on in that sector. My guests still with me, Kahi Ndimuli, Amos Kaburu, and Dr. Kilemi Mwiria. Gentlemen, thank you for continuing to be with us. Also a reminder to keep your feedback, your questions and comments coming in. The hashtag is The Explainer. We'll be looking forward to your feedback on this critical conversation. Kahi, let's begin once again with you.
Yep.
So we understand it's what, slightly over 22,000 shillings in capitation per student.
Yes.
For, a basic understanding, what is this capitation fee for? Where does it go to? What does it fund?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank Kenya government. After the Kilemi Mwiria team came up with proposals, I think we started off with the 10,625 in 2015. 2008. Then it came to 12,000 in 2015, and in 2018 it was increased to 22,244. That we do appreciate. Now the capitation has areas that it funds. Mainly, it was supposed to take care of tuition. That is why it was being referred to as a free day secondary education program. So that those students who are going into day schools would actually walk into the school and would get tuitioning without having to pay anything. But then there are other costs, especially issues to do with salaries for non-teaching staff members, issues to do with the electricity and water payments, local transport and travel for students and teachers whenever they go to functions. So that was what capitation is expected to cover. But with the time, there have been other expenditures that have come in through other policy directive. For example, the issue of medical care of students in secondary education. When it was declared that government will take up medical care of children, initially as principals we thought that there would be a special fund that would come to take care of that. But this came, and the same capitation had to fund that medical care. Issues of training of teachers in science and mathematics through the SEMASE program. Again, capitation, part of capitation has been taken to take care of that. So you find that with time, the figure as expected, even activities that has to be funded through the same capitation. So you find with the retentions being retained at the ministry to run these other programs, eventually what actually reaches the school is not the 22,244 physically to the school. It would reach through other programs. And what now remains to run the school is about 10,000 shillings. And that's not enough. Once you get that 10,000, your father told to put aside at least 5,000 shillings to cater for infrastructure. So basically, what the principals are left with to run their institution is about 5,000 shillings per year. That is challenging. And apart from that, you'd find the delays come in, and then that 22 is not coming in full. And then you find also that not all students are captured in the entire funding. You may have 400 students and maybe 300 have been captured. And therefore, as Kenya Secondary School Heads Association, we've been raising these concerns that why are we not factoring in all children? Because funding depends entirely on the number of children that have been captured on the NEMIS system. Unfortunately, the NEMIS system, as it has been, it has not been easy to capture all the students because of the documentation that you need, birth certificates which sometimes don't agree. So you find that we don't fund all the children. We followed up this, and we also discovered that or learned that the Ministry of Education is also not receiving funds as budgeted for. So they receive less funds from Treasury. And with the less funds, they disperse, and we keep complaining. We had to take some action as Kenya Secondary School Heads Association by putting up a petition to Parliament so that Parliament may compel, in our opinion, Treasury to release all the arrears. And the arrears have been cumulative.
Over how long?
From 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, the number of students that are in school and the number of students that funds are released for is not in agreement. So you find that arrears have been building, and this translates to school. Yeah. And as it translates, you find that even the schools now are ending up having what everybody is saying, pending bills to pay.
So help me understand that, because we understand the arrears are over 87 billion shillings. Perhaps you can correct us or let us know if that figure is accurate or has changed. But help us understand this. As a school principal, when those funds are, one, inadequate, and two, delayed, what do? How do you manage the situation? Because we hear stories of, you go to the local suppliers and you get items on credit, or sometimes you would ask the parents to chip in because, it is what it is. But this is an opportunity for us to hear from you now as to what principals do when these funds are delayed.
It is surprising, and I would want to say that and appreciate all my colleagues for ensuring that these schools run without a hitch and ensure that teaching and learning is taking place. For example, we have entirely relied on the goodwill of our suppliers, and I really want to salute them, because when the funds delay, we've always told them that when the funds come, we'll be able to sort you out. And a majority of suppliers in schools have been very, very committed to ensuring that the schools are running. Reason being, most of them are local suppliers, so they also look at those schools as their schools. Yeah? But when we delay them also, we make them impoverished in one way or the other. Number two, we have colleagues, and this nobody believes, who have gone ahead and even taken personal loans to run these schools, especially in sub-county schools.
Yes. As a school, or loans?
No.
As
personal,
individuals?
as individuals.
Okay.
To run with the hope that when capitation comes in, they would be able to refund wherever they have borrowed. Yeah. Either if they borrowed from their own resources, or they have borrowed from even maybe a member of the board, or, they will be able to refund. So when it delays, it interferes with even the goodwill of those who would support you. And that's why we are saying, let capitation, when it is given, come on time, and then let it be in full.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Muria, you, as Kahi has talked about, heading that task force, putting in these amounts, it's obviously evolved, over time in terms of amount and what it funds. What's your sense of how particularly the issue of capitation has evolved? Initially it was for tuition, but now it's covering a lot more. What's your sense in terms of how it has evolved over time? And is it now still fit for purpose in the way in which it is structured and what it is funding now compared to what was envisioned by the task force?
Thank you, Yvonne. And I'll take it from where, my colleague had said it. It's, the thing is, let's first of all agree that there is no time there'll be enough money for schools. There's not enough money for salaries. I mean, there's not enough money for medical services. And let's also agree that in Kenya, we are one of the countries in the world that spend the most money on education, about 28% now of the national budget. Yet, we have to also address the needs of other service sectors, including health and anything else related, even to, that will support the young people once they're out of school. So the money has been, the amount of money has increased from what we recommended in 2014. And it makes sense because, there's been inflation. Things cost more now than before. But I think it's going to be completely impossible for, it's not going to be possible given the competing needs that government has to, address to have the amount that the teachers ask for. Idimuli says that sometimes they have to ask for loans, personal loans to run schools, that you have to speak to, suppliers. The point is that eventually they are paid because otherwise it wouldn't, continue. So the capitation would never be enough. The amount of money from government will be enough. Therefore, the question is, what should we do, as a country? I think this is a subject that requires quite a bit of debate. What should we do? We need to widen the net and, ask more, from those who could give a little bit more than they are giving. There are parents who do not need as much support as others. If you look at this, this country, you look at the results now, a lot of the kids that did the best came from private academies. But these private academies, they cost much more than public schools. Some of them are even more expensive than secondary schools. So in other words, the point I'm making is that there are parents who can afford to put in more. So are we doing that? And putting in more could be by way of, like, if we have private primary schools, why don't we have many more private secondary schools? Because these parents can afford that way. That would relieve government. The other one is, there's CDF money. Every member of parliament now has got money. And apparently this is going to stay on. Is that money being used the best way possible to supplement what government gives? You can go to the counties, quite a bit of money. In fact, some counties can afford to run schools quite effectively. If you can go to northeastern Kenya, with the small population of students that they have and the amount of money that is available, I don't see why they can't, manage quality education if you go by the amount of money they have per capita per kid. So all I'm saying is, let us be realistic. We've realized it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. Things are not getting any better, and it's not only education that is suffering. And education, we have agreed, we know receives much more than anywhere else. It's any other sector. So what is it that we can do to ensure that we do not leave everything to government? Personally, I see education as a shared responsibility. I think parents have a responsibility. Communities have a responsibility. The private sector have a responsibility. So really, we've got to begin to, be much more innovative in terms of appreciating and knowing that it's going to be impossible. Therefore, to get everything that we need from government and have to find other ways of, supporting what there is. But in addition to that, also be aware that I am not pretty sure that, all that money that is going to school is being used for that purpose. Idimuli said, sometimes the budget and for students are more than what comes in. But there are many cases where there are many ghost students.
As well.
Yeah, there are many ghost students. Thousands of ghost students the money is going for. There are many ghost schools. As we found out, that money is also being, is going in there. So it's, and there's so much corruption in the education system. I mean, including in the schools themselves. It's, principals will ask for levies, will ask for money that should not, that is not accounted for. If you go to a national school, for example, some national schools will ask for more than 100,000. If you have 1,000 kids in a school, or 2,000, that's, like, is it 100 million shillings? That you have to play around with in some of these schools. We also know there's corruption in terms of other money that is being collected by principals that is not accounted for. Now, this is a year of Form 1 intakes. There are schools that will create extra classrooms that will not report to the ministry. And the money that is collected will go to, so there's this money.
Okay.
I'm simply saying, let us widen the net. Let us be realistic, but more importantly, let us make sure that every shilling that goes to the school is used for that purpose. And finally, there is a need for for coordinating what is available. You go to places, you go to parts of this country where there are NGOs putting money, in school fees, in school facilities. You find that, they are members of parliament. You find that there are church organizations, there are local philanthropists. All this, there's a lot of money from bursary, from banks. The question is, and yet, even with all that money all over the place now, from Equity Bank, Cooperative Bank, and other philanthropies, and then government money from CDF, from counties, and the Minister of Education, yet you hear of children scoring 406, 400, for whom money is being raised to go to school. It's a problem of coordination. And if we do that, I think if we widen the net, coordinate what we have, improve the utilization of plug-in more, improve the utilization of what comes in, I think we can do much better. We can do probably 30 to 40% better than we are doing.
Okay, Amos, do you agree? Is the way in which we are funding it fit for purpose? Is it meeting the intended objective?
No, it doesn't. And I wish to slightly differ with Dr. Muiria in terms of the blanket condemnation that he's putting across. I think, as I did mention in the beginning, the people who bear the greatest brunt of this challenge are day schools, and they don't have the latitude of what he's trying to describe. These are a lot of our day schools that are going through serious challenges, and they actually bear the largest proportion of the schools that are holding up to sometimes 50, 60%. But I also agree with Dr. Muiria on the issue of our configuration of what are we funding, what are the specific vote heads that we are funding, rethinking around sources of our financing, thinking around the issue of working capital, which comes with the issues of disbursement. There is the issue of absorption, and there is issue of accountability. And the challenge that we are facing at the moment is a big conspiracy or configuration of factors around accountability that now makes it extremely difficult for things to work. And part of what Kahi is complaining over here is how there is institutional failure in terms of calling each other to account. And I'll use one example to demonstrate this, what I may call an unholy alliance. Parliament has a responsibility of exercising oversight. But you see what happens when there is a form of an informal alliance around resourcing of education, that members of parliament sometimes have to hold the executive so tight, for what I don't want to mention, for them to release CDF funds, in which the bulk of these resources are going towards education. That means that indirectly you create a conflict of interest, in the sense that the same parliament finds it very difficult to someone, whether it's Treasury, whether it's the Minister of Education, and to ask the hard questions. So it becomes very difficult that on one hand, you have got an executive that these things that Kahi is presenting over here are not rocket science. It doesn't need that the Kenya Secondary Schools Heads Association should petition Parliament for Parliament to ask some of these questions. Why were we talking about things that appear like it is news when it is not news? Why haven't people been censured? Why haven't people been taken to account on as to why schools should be running without resources? And as I did mention earlier on, that it makes the system to be prone to abuse, in the sense that now people resort now to creativity. And you see, if you've not played your responsibility, it's very difficult for you to ask me to play my responsibility or to account for it, because you didn't release resources on time. So how do you come to account for what you didn't release on time? It becomes extremely difficult for us to get some of these answers. But we have to go back to the basics, as Dr. Muiria mentions, to ask ourselves, what are the cost configuration of our education in this country? And for as long as education is defined from the existing parameters, variables, and cost drivers, it will be extremely difficult for us to fund our education. We mentioned this one more than 10 years ago. It's still a challenge right now, and it's going even to get harder. And I think that's why I think it's commendable that the Presidential Working Party was quite bold to say that, no, we have to be very realistic and ask ourselves, this is the education that we want, but it is idealistic. Are we able to fund it? We are not able to fund it. Because if you look at the allocations to the Minister of Education, by the time President Kibaki was leaving at less than 300 billion. Right now, we're close to 700 billion per year. So you look at the overall allocations towards the ministry in terms of billions, it's been increasing. Even if you talk about we're injecting close to another 1 million children every year in the system, but it's not commensurate with what we are putting in. But if you look at the unit allocation per child, it seems to be going lower. So we are never going to achieve the kind of resourcing, whether we talk about these are the benchmarks by UNESCO, these are the benchmarks by whatever, it's still not going to work in our own case. So we must be a little bit bold and ask ourselves that what do we specifically need to fund? What are the areas that we need to fund?
Yeah.
What should be the priorities? And what should define these parameters? And fix the issue of accountability so that we're able to account for every single resource that we get.
Yeah.
We haven't even discussed about something we call the cost of failure. I was having a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine called Martin Mburu today, and we spent the better part of the day discussing it. The issue of cost of failure. You cannot explain how government should be giving a capitation of 22,000 to a child every year for 4 years before we include cost of paying teachers, before we include the cost of infrastructure, and we still produce 48,000 E's. I mean, this is a national shame. I mean, how could we spend more than 200,000 on a child for this child to come out and be able to that they got an E? What does it need for you to get an E? You only need to write your name and then you sleep in the examination room. Did they need to stay in school for 12 years, spend all these resources, and you're coming out and telling us that they have got grade E's? I think we must get a little bit serious as a country and ask ourselves, are we really getting value for what we are putting into our education? And that's what I totally agree with Dr. Muria, that we must ask some of these hard questions. Accountability is not working in this country. We must ask people a few difficult questions.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make a correction.
Yeah.
It looked like I was saying the situation in schools is the same. I want to agree with you completely. The situation in day schools is horrible. It's very difficult with the amount of money that they receive. But if you look at what we call extra county and national schools and so on, is the kind of situation I was describing. Unfortunately, those are the minority. And yet, like Kaburu says, the biggest problem we have now is where the numbers are, and that's in day schools. So the question is, how do we, first of all, even expect that day schools can compete with schools that are much better financed and where even the parents are able to do much better? So I agree completely, yes. But what I would say is that if we have to put more resources in schools, where we should focus the most is where the majority are. After all, I'm a great believer, we did recommend even in 2014 that we should be gradually moving towards ensuring that most schools are day schools. Because it's more equalizing.
And that's been a recommendation.
Yes.
Of the presidential party working group.
Yes, and we recommended this in 2014. So it's, the day schools are in trouble. That's where the majority are. Last year, even if you want to look at the results this year, of the 700,000 kids who never got a C+ and above, the greater majority will be from day schools.
Day schools, yeah.
So it's a real challenge, and I think that's where we should be focusing if we indeed, want to ensure that the majority do not only have access to education, but they have quality education that will make it possible for them to actually, get further in life. And talking about waste, waste is not just about government; it's also about parents putting money. Kids get E's, and that's it. Yeah. So it's this.
So that cost is it's a big shared all around.
Yes.
Kahi, I want to just get into those priority areas.
Yes.
And for this would be a good time to mention or to perhaps congratulate you on having just retired from being principal of Machakos Boys High School. Congratulations on that. And this would be a good moment to get your reflections on the priority areas now, because, of course there's competing interests, right? So we need more teachers, we need better infrastructure, and now with JSS, which we'll get to in a minute. But where are the priority areas? What do we do? Do we handle all of them? Which goes first when it comes to funding and prioritizing those areas with that?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to appreciate your congratulations. It has been 37 years of teaching.
Congratulations.
And 34 of which in positions of school administration as a deputy and as a principal. And I want to thank God to have given me the opportunity, and the very many parents and children who had confidence in me and allowed me to mentor their children until they finish Form 4. Of course, we'll discuss another day the ups and downs during that journey.
It'll be good to hear.
But I would want to say that Kenya has done a lot in terms of financing. From my experience as an immediate past chairman of African Confederation of Principals, and I've seen what other countries have put in terms of investments in education, we are doing very well. We only need to ensure that whatever we are putting in education is well apportioned so that what needs to be done first is done. In my view, the first thing that we want to ensure is having a trained teacher ready to handle these children. Because the teacher plays a very significant role. And that is why when we are complaining that capitation is not enough, is because schools and board of management through the principals have now come in to play a role that was not originally meant for them in terms of employment of teachers on BOM terms. You see, that eats into the capitation. And what do we have to do? Sometimes principals will call parents and tell them we need budget support to be able to take care of these extra teachers. I'm happy and I want to appreciate the government for having employed 56,000 teachers, and they are planning to employ many more in this financial year. I would wish the number also remains at 56 and not lower, because the challenge of teaching is large. Now we have JSS, but we should not forget that the other senior schools also require the teachers. I have seen some arguments that next year there will be no Form 1s, so there will be excess teachers in these schools. Far from the truth, because all these schools today are over-enrolled. Classes are congested. Why are they congested? Because the human resource is not enough. So for you to be able to use, let's say, one teacher teaching English, for example, you put many students together so that you utilize that one teacher.
Yeah.
Now, if you reduce the class size to what is proposed or what is expected to 45, you find that you'll need 2 more classes, and each extra class requires a teacher. Now, what is likely going to happen is when we do not have Form 1s next year, schools will ease the congestion and now utilize those extra teachers that may be seen to be excess. So there will be no excess. We still need to look for that. So number 1 is a teacher. Number 2 is to ensure that we have unified infrastructure, not only the buildings, but infrastructure that is needed for teaching and learning. I'm looking at situations of laboratories, libraries that can allow children to do their own research. And the Presidential Working Party did a recommendation, which was very good, that we declassify the schools. So that if we are going to look at all schools equal, then we must put resources in the schools that are today underprivileged. What we've talked about, the sub-county schools, which are carrying majority of our children. And they have the capability of doing better. If you look at the results that was just released, and you look at the number of students going to university, comparing county schools vis-a-vis sub-county schools, you will notice that the sub-county schools have actually taken more children to university than the county schools. Look at the data, the statistics that was given by Kenya National Examination Council, meaning that there is potential there. So we need to ensure that we have enough facilities, well-resourced, well-equipped laboratories, and we ease the challenge on the boarding schools today. When you look at the map-up of 100% transition, if you look back, even in your own news items, you will find that whenever these children were being mopped up, they were taken to boarding schools. They were never taken to day schools. And immediately you put that child in a boarding schools, there is a cost implication.
Yeah.
Immediately it moves to 53,000
Yes.
per day, you know. Yes, government had the Elimu scholars, but not all of them managed to get the Elimu scholars. So sometimes they are mopped up, they come to school, first term, second term, third term, the principal is asking for fees. This fees is not there. This child drops out. Principals have sometimes even gone ahead to come up with a kitty. For example, in our schools, we had to come up with a kitty known as Cry for the Needy, where every month each teacher pays 200 shillings into that kitty. Then we have parents who can produce more. Students, when they are opening, like when they were opening this time, they each come with 50 shillings. It is put in the kitty. And then at the end of the year, you have maybe about 500,000 and you distribute it to some of the needy children that are there. Yeah. Schools are doing that to ensure that we keep our children in school. So ensuring the children are in school is important. It has been mentioned here that there is a lot of bursaries out there. I totally agree. And the biggest challenge we have with the bursaries is that there is no central coordination point. The Presidential Working Party had this recommendation that we must put a way in which we can manage and monitor these bursaries. Principals will tell you that a child comes to school, he has a bursary from source A, there will be another bursary from source B, there will be another bursary from source C. At the end of the year, a parent is coming and telling you, my child has excess money. I borrowed some money to pay before these bursaries came in. Can I get a refund?
Right.
You know? And it becomes very difficult because if a refund should be there, then it should be taken to the funding body. Okay. Supposing we had that central data collection point, so that if Daktari here is sponsoring a child A, puts that information there. If Mr. Kaburu comes and he wants to sponsor the same child, queries the system, and the system will tell him this child already has support from Daktari for a period of 3 years. Then Mr. Kaburu can look for another child.
Right.
But the way we are doing, we are putting money sometimes on very few children, and this money ends up going back to people who are not supposed to have it.
Indeed.
So that issue of the way we manage our bursaries to ensure that children are in school must be addressed as recommended. We would also wish to continue appealing. You know, sometimes when we say we need increase in capitation, people would say, why do we also need money, a lot of money all the time? But we may not need money per se, but certain things can be done to cushion schools.
Okay.
I've talked before that the Kenya Power rates for institutions are too high. If a school has to pay 800,000 for electricity bill in a month, how will that school manage in a year? And you see, whatever we are doing, we are getting it from capitation. Supposing these institutions were put on a special tariff, so that part of, instead of paying that huge amount, can pay a reasonable amount to ease out part of that money
which can then go into
to cushion some other areas.
All right,
you know,
so those are some interesting...
That is a way of increasing capitation, not necessarily saying increase the 22.
Okay.
Look at just the service provision that are there.
Okay.
See how you can...
That's interesting.
Yeah, because I want to take it up from there.
Yeah.
Obviously, the teacher is the most critical.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we went to school many years ago, you know, one teacher was doing a great job. I mean, we say a teacher is like 75% of the work. So I agree. And they need to be trained. but there is another side to it. Those teachers, we also must make sure that we have norms that make it possible for us to use the teachers most cost efficiently. How much time are they spending on task? Are they doing other things? Secondly, it's with so many secondary schools coming up, without rationalizing the number of schools that are coming up, where politicians will start a secondary school across another one because the opponent started one, where you find secondary schools with fewer than 100 students, when it's recommended that the minimum there should be for a secondary school to be efficient is like 180 students. That's what we recommended. So again, as long as politicians and, we can just open secondary schools, there will never be enough teachers in this country. So we need to consolidate. We need to consolidate these schools and ensure that there is a maximum number that would be useful. Secondly, it is possible to share resources. There are schools that have laboratories, but not all schools, with very few students need labs. Is it possible for neighboring schools to share laboratories, to share school buses, to share some of the best teachers? If you have a good physics teacher, they can teach across different schools. So these are possibilities. But related to the teacher also and the school principal, management. It is important to have managers who can, school managers who are able to manage those resources efficiently, both the time and the teachers that are, their own teachers, and the money that is available. Because I was just, we were having a debate here we were talking with Mwalim here and Kaburu. For me, one of the questions I've always been interested in, both as a politician and an academic, is why is it that some schools are more effective than others, even when they have the same amount of resources, the same number of teachers? If you look at these schools, some day schools are doing much better than some county schools. Yeah, it's management. Okay. The key is management. So therefore, what kind of people do we have in our schools? A priority really should be who is identified to be a school manager. Are they identified on the basis of the sponsor, the political connections, on merit? Until we do that, it's going to be a problem to get those resources that come to our schools to be used as well as they should. So yes, teachers, but let's make sure that teachers are used as maximally. Let's not have schools all over the place, and yet TSC has to put schools, teachers to all those schools, and let's ensure that those who are given the responsibility of managing those teachers and other resources have the right training and are the right people for the job.
Indeed. Amos?
I wanted also to emphasize something about resource sharing. It's very critical. There is a lot that can be achieved. For the last 2 years, I've spent a little bit of time studying private schools in this country. And of course, it's nascent, but it's something very, very interesting how we've never unlocked some of the private capital in this country that will do a lot in terms of resource sharing. But I think that there is a bigger conversation around brokering a complementary conversation between the private and the public sector, away from our narrow understanding of what is public-private partnership, and really rethink around the 4 principles of PPP: complementarity, additionality, scalability, and sustainability. And what I'm beginning to appreciate over time is the power of local systems. And we're having this conversation with Dr. Mwiria around how do you facilitate local school systems to become powerful. And that is one of the things that you realize that any meaningful education in this country is actually private. It's not public. What do I mean by that? For you to get the kind of results that you're getting, you really have to get either parents paying a lot for it, mostly, because if you're going to run Machakos, where Mr. Kahi was, you really can't run Machakos with the 22,000 shillings from what is coming from government. You really have to sit down and negotiate with the parents, as Dr. Mwiria said, for you to get the kind of resource that you want. Otherwise, if you pump 22,000, Alliance will never be what it is. But unfortunately, when it comes to our local systems, particularly day schools, we try to curtail them. So the intention is good that let's protect them, but the outcome becomes the unintended. It doesn't seem to serve the purpose. So there is need for us to rethink a little bit how, first of all, we empower the local system so that the parental understanding of what is my responsibility is not just on the surface to say that education is free. I can assure you that every parent will want to do something to support the education of their children. But the politics of the day makes it appear like you should not pay because there are some optics around it. The issues that Dr. Muria is mentioning are very good, but why is it that they can't happen? Because every politician wants to buy a school bus for every school because those are the optics that get you votes. So if a politician will say that school A and school B should share a bus, obviously they will lose votes. So they really want to do things for the optics.
Right.
And then broker this conversation around how do we ensure that the public and the private sector can actually complement each other. Because you really have to ask yourself today, why is it that there is a lot of flows going towards people who are establishing private schools in Kenya? And they're able to fund it comfortably, and they're able to service those loans. Because if you see to imagine what we thought that COVID-19 will do to our private schools, but private schools came out, emerged stronger. 2 years ago, when we made a decision a year ago that junior secondary school will be placed in primary schools and no secondary schools, while the public system is almost crashing, the private sector is thriving. Even the lowest of a private school charging 3,000 shillings in Kibra is surviving compared to the big public school around. So I think for me, there is also something that we can learn from the local solutions to the problems that we are facing. That some of these things are not too academic as sometimes we present them, and the solutions are not necessarily going to come from the traditional north. This is what UNICEF told us, this is what UNESCO told us, this is what the US told us. If we really hit our heads a little bit, even that local entrepreneur within my village market of Chekalini can do something in terms of fixing education. But, sorry again to refer to, I was having this conversation with Martin this morning, and we say sometimes the challenge we are facing in education is that the stakeholders in education are too inward looking. This conversation is just surrounding those of us who did B.Ed, and so we get lost into the theorization of what we did. But sometimes, even if you look at some of the well-performing private schools, they are not by people who did B.Ed. Some of the critical and well-functioning solutions in this country are not necessarily being theorized by educationists.
So solutions,
by training.
Solutions exist.
Solutions exist. Solutions exist, and we just have to be more deliberate. We have to bring, as Dr. Muria said, bring more people into the net, allow it to happen, and not just close our eyes and say that, no, we are the experts. I think probably expertise rises beyond, and I hope next time we don't be calling some of us as experts. We are just local Kenyans sharing a bit of what we have. Expertise really raised out here, and we should really be open towards it. Many Kenyans really want to say these things. Finally, let's implement the minimum essential package program. It was a great idea by the Kenya Kwanza administration. Some of these schools are too small. We really can't give capitation based on their population. It's a great idea that the president had. Let's say that for us really to safeguard, because the principle of classifying schools, what is a big school, what is a medium-sized school, what is a small school, and the issue around planning so that you do not have the problem of some places have a lot of schools. Like you see where we are right now, St. George's Primary, Nairobi Primary, and State House Primary. For heaven's sake, you don't need those 3 schools. And then you go to areas such as Pipeline, they don't have schools. So some cases you find places which need schools don't have, and other places have surplus. So how can we do some form of redistribution, including even redistribution of teachers and some of these assets? And finally, people like Indimuli over here, much as they have retired, they are not tired. We must find a way in which some of these resources can also still be utilized. And the question around who goes to particularly head some of our day schools, I don't know whether things have changed or not, but I think we also want to see a little bit more of chief principals also heading some of those schools to also share in that expertise. It's not just right that we make you the chief principal to go to that national school where everything is already set, you are already given children with 400 marks, capitation is good, and you can charge the way you feel like, you can employ 50 teachers on BOM. No, I think let's also see many of them also taking over some of these day schools, and they bring out some of those beautiful ideas, and things will work.
I will take that as your last comment, but also just to note, perhaps Martin Mburu, wherever you are, should have been part of this panel. He has been referenced and adversely mentioned. Allow me, please, to give a minute each. I will take those as your last comments. I must thank you for that. A minute each for you, Kahi, and then we will come to you, Dr. Muria, just to give us closing thoughts on where we are with this. I know we've talked about trained teachers, infrastructure, taking the funding where it is needed most, centralized funding, sharing resources, management of the same resources prudently, of course, and the power of local systems. But what are your closing thoughts in a minute or two, please?
What I would say first is I'm happy that at least capitation is being released early this time. I hope all the children in the secondary schools have been captured so that we don't have any of them being left out. I want us to look at the Presidential Working Party's recommendation, and I agree with Kaburu that minimum essential package to run a school is a very noble idea, it's a game changer. This should be there. Lastly, just to ask parents, I know results are out, and at the moment people are looking at schools that have done well and schools that have not done well. This is the most dreaded time by principals. Because when the school has not done well, the buck stops with the principal. Yeah. I want to ask parents to be patient. They should not condemn those schools that have not done well. They should sit down with the school management and find out what is this that they too can come to do to help in alleviating the challenge the school may be facing. And lastly, as I've said before, it is time to rethink boarding. If we want to cut down the cost of running education in this country at secondary level, then we need to think of how do we reduce the number of children being taken to boarding schools. We can only do that by ensuring that our day schools are well resourced. And we'll be able to bring down this cost to a minimum level that all parents can manage. Mm-hmm. And just to say, I'm now in the last bit of being referred to as the outgoing chairman of Kenya Secondary School Heads Association. I want to thank all the principals for having had confidence in me to serve them as the national chairman. I want to thank them and say we will still be there to support and discuss with them on how we can move forward. And the incoming acting chair before the elections, I want to wish him all the best. Maybe next time when you call me to discuss about the journey, I will tag him along, yeah, so that we can discuss this together.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mary?
Yeah, I'll start from where we began and say that we all agree, and government can't run away from it, that education is a basic need. The basic education is a right, so we have to provide. But it's not enough to provide to just say automatic transition. We must, we have to make sure that what you get is of some value. Secondly, I'd like to say that we must focus where the numbers are. The numbers are in day schools, and the day schools are the future. But if we want, to gradually move to day schools, we must make them attractive. We must make attractive by ensuring that they have the right facilities. I mean, they have everything else that a county school has got: good labs, good libraries, good computers, and adequate teachers. But because that will not happen overnight, even in terms of expecting good results from them, we have to ensure that parents can see that kids who go to those schools can also do, well, after secondary school, by way of being able to do, medicine, being able to do engineering, being able to do a BCom, the degrees that are reserved for only the privileged schools. The moment parents see that, they will see value in these schools and they want to invest in them. And for government, if we have to put money there, it's got to come from somewhere. And if we are saying that 1% of the national budget is already going in there, what else is available? What about if we started a lottery, or an education levy? Or said, look, everybody uses a telephone, airtime. And we have a tax, education tax from airtime, where you say 10% of what you spend on airtime is tax for education, and so on and so on. So innovative ways, fuel levies, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of money out there, unclaimed assets. Why don't we take this money and go invest in these schools? In other words, I'm saying we should come up with a plan. We have to be dramatic. We have to be, we have been very, we have some kind of Marshall Plan for these day schools, because unless they catch up, we can say, for forever, we can keep on saying that that's where we should be. But unless they catch up and parents have faith in them, the students have faith in them, want to go in them, it's not going to happen. So any focus And whatever resources are available should be directed to those schools where the majority are and which are in most need, because we'll then democratize quality secondary school education. And very soon that's the way we should be going. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Dr. Kilemi Mwiria, Amos Kaburu, and Kahi Indimuli. Congratulations on 37 years of service.
Thank you.
I cannot imagine the number of students whom you have impacted over close to 40 years of service in that. We wish you all the very best, and thank you for making the time for us, each of you gentlemen. We appreciate this conversation, which is definitely one we continue to have. Thank you very much for watching The Explainer tonight. Keep your views coming. It's a conversation we definitely cannot finish tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm Yvonne Okwara. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.